The following podcast is brought to you by the Crime Prevention 101 Safety Store, your one-stop shop for personal safety. Come by and browse at crimeprevention101.com.
Welcome to Crime Prevention 101, the podcast with an optimistic perspective on a sober subject. The views and ideas expressed on this program are strictly those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the host, associate participants, or sponsors. Now, here's your host, Crime Prevention Specialist Susan Bartelstone.
Oh boy. Hey, everybody. You know, it's so easy to dismiss something that you are unfamiliar with as weird or woo-woo-woo or airy-fairy, but I've seen too many tears and too much pain over my more than 30 years in the crime prevention biz, and I am always looking for ways to help people heal from their traumas. It's my mission and my purpose in life to keep people safe and to help them heal if that's what they need. So I'm just saying, sometimes you got to keep an open mind. You might really benefit from something you dismiss out of the gate as ridiculous. This is Susan Bartelstone. As always, my partner in crime prevention, Lydia Perez, the tech whiz as I call her, is here with me in the Universal Dojo. Hey, Lydia.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast.
Now, Lydia, today we're going to be talking about another alternative healing modality that a lot of people have never heard of. It's called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, or sometimes it's just called tapping. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard about EFT?
Yes, I've heard of it, and I've actually seen some videos on YouTube with the tapping going on.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, great. What'd you think?
I thought it was interesting. Anything that helps calm us, anything that helps heal our traumas, I'm all for. So
Me too, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting technique, and I definitely want to learn a little bit more about it. So yeah. I know you have valuable information for us.
Yeah. So emotional freedom technique, or EFT, or sometimes it's just known as tapping, is an innovative and potentially life-changing therapeutic modality. It is not just head games. It combines the Eastern medicine concept of meridians and pressure points with the Western concept of psychotherapy. It's all natural. It's totally non-invasive. It's a way to relieve stress without any kind of medication or anything like that. And it can be combined with any manner of, or any number of so-called, quote, traditional therapies that you might want. So this is another tool you might want to add to the healing toolbox.
Nice. And
for those for whom it works, because again, nothing is going to be 100% for everybody, it can achieve healing results much faster and or augment traditional therapy modalities to make it a quicker process for you.
All right, guys. So we've done a number of podcasts dealing with dark topics. Dating cautions, scams, date rape, and date rape drugs. So we thought it was once again time to do some healing here in the Universal Dojo. So this podcast is the second in a series of shows we're going to be doing on non-traditional methods for healing from the debilitating consequences of crime, violence, physical or emotional abuse, or any kind of trauma for that matter.
Absolutely. Now today, we're revisiting an interview from my former Crime Prevention 101 radio show, not to be confused with the podcast, Crime Prevention 101. The interview is with someone named Sophia Cayer, who was one of the earliest and one of the foremost practitioners and trainers of EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique.
Right. And so remember, this podcast is for educational purposes only. In no way is it suggesting, like Sophia Cayer herself states in the interview, that this is a substitute for proper medical care or good common sense. And Right, here. And while EFT has produced notable results for some people, it must still be considered experimental and thus Practitioners and the public must take complete responsibility if they're going to use it. Furthermore, it does not claim to diagnose or treat any illnesses.
All right, let's take a quick break. This is an important message. I want you to hear it. Stay tuned. And I got safety tips for you and some important announcements for you at the end of the show. You're going to be sorry if you're not there to hear it.
You're listening to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartelstone. Susan would like to remind you that no absolutes exist in a crime scenario, and no advice can possibly address every variable. Each situation should be evaluated individually and responded to in the way you instinctively judge best. It's Susan's aim on this podcast to provide you with the information and options that will help you make that instinctive assessment quickly and safely. However, sometimes nothing can be done to prevent a bad outcome. And if you're already a survivor of the kind of crime we're talking about on the show today, or any other crime for that matter, please remember that there are no right or wrong responses in a criminal encounter, and nothing that happened to you was your fault. Even if you think you used bad judgment in the situation and left yourself vulnerable, that's never an excuse for a crime or violence. So please, call yourself a survivor and not a victim. And understand that with time, distance, and the proper professional help, you can put what happened into perspective and get on with your life. Now, back to Crime Prevention 101.
Now, let's go to my previously recorded interview with Sophia Cayer and learn about EFT, this innovative healing technique.
And if you're a survivor of any kind of crime, violence, or trauma, if you know or are living with someone who's a survivor, or if you know someone who treats survivors in a clinical practice, make sure you share this show with them.
The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Welcome to Crime Prevention 101. This is the personal safety radio show with an optimistic perspective on a sober subject. I'm your host, Susan Bartelstone, and it is my great privilege, as always, to spend the next hour with you helping you keep yourself safe. And I have a show for you today. I am just so excited about this show. Now, over the many, many years that I've been teaching and working in the personal safety field, I have heard countless stories from crime survivors, and I have seen too many tears and too much pain. So my first segment on today's show strikes at one of the core objectives of what I consider my mission for doing this radio show, to provide information on how you can heal if you've been traumatized or assaulted. And we all know about the traditional means that are offered, psychotherapy, or medication, or both. But I want my show to expand your knowledge about the non-traditional healing options that are available. Options that address the trauma of sexual violence, domestic violence, the debilitating symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that come from any trauma that you may be suffering. So I'm starting off the show by talking about what's called emotional freedom techniques, and these are also known as EFT or tapping. In particular, since October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, how this therapeutic healing technique, how it can relate to treating survivors of domestic violence. And this is the second show that I've done on EFT because it is such a compelling and interesting topic. And I'm going to post a link to the earlier show that I did also in the show notes for this show on my blog site. So if you want more information about it, because we were able to actually do a little bit of a longer segment on it, you can check it out there. Now, EFT is a technique that's most closely analogous to ancient Chinese meridian healing systems, except that it's designed to aid in the relief of both physical and deep emotional trauma. So even though EFT hasn't been fully recognized by Western academic, medical, or psychological communities, there is scientific research being done about it right now, and it appears to have many promising benefits. And there's also an impressive amount of anecdotal evidence from thousands of people, including children, who've experienced relief using this method. So I'm going to be speaking with EFT Master Practitioner Sophia Cayer, author of EFT Language, Creating It and Going with the Flow, and she's the person that I interviewed previously about this innovative healing tool. And I know that some of you might be skeptical about this, but I urge you to keep an open mind and investigate it for yourself before you dismiss it as weird or airy-fairy or too good to be true. It really bears a close look. Now, without any further talking by me, let me introduce you to Sophia. Sophia Cayer is one of only 29 people in the world who has attained the designation EFT Master Practitioner, and she's been helping people resolve issues and achieve their personal goals for more than 15 years. As I mentioned before, she's the author of EFT Language, Creating It and Going with the Flow, and by the way, I got to get that book. And she has worked as a volunteer for many worthy causes. Most recently, she worked with Hurricane Katrina survivors, and she's now working with domestic violence organizations to bring EFT to domestic violence survivors. Sophia, hello.
Hello, Susan.
What a pleasure to be talking to you again.
Well, same here.
All right, let's start at the beginning. Tell everybody, what is EFT or tapping?
Well, you did a pretty good job with it. I think that maybe just to simplify it for people even more, if you look at it like emotional acupuncture without the needles. There's no needles, there's no equipment, and rather than the little trickle of energy that gets sent through the meridians when you do acupuncture, when we use tapping on those specific points that we work with, it's kind of like sending thunderbolts through there to help really get the energy flowing. And
now that's actually a great analogy, Sophia, because emotional acupuncture,
right?
That you know, and I have tried this, and that really is a very valid description of it.
Yeah, it's, like I said, very much like acupuncture, but no needles, no equipment. And the thing that I love about this the very most is that it is such a powerful tool to help people feel empowered themselves. Once they get past initial hurdles and kind of get the hang of it, there is so much of this work that they can do totally on their own. To relieve anything from mild anxiety to just about anything you can think of.
Physical and emotional, right.
Regardless of whether somebody feels that it's too good to be true or not, it's a great way to gain independence, and it is, I personally have witnessed literally thousands of people's lives changed as a result of working with this, including people who felt that there simply was no hope.
There are some stories on the websites that are just incredible, that really bear looking at. Talk a little bit about how it originated. How did it come to be?
Well, Gary Craig, who was actually trained as an engineer, worked with a gentleman named Roger Callahan, who was one of the first licensed psychologists in Chicago. And Roger had learned basically through just on a whim one day when he was working with someone, because he had been very frustrated about how slow doing talk therapy was working. He just felt he wasn't getting the results he wanted to see. And he took a shot at it with someone who had a terrible water phobia, and did some tapping with her. And he was absolutely mortified because she jumped up and ran out the office door and headed straight towards the swimming pool.
Well, that's very traumatic evidence for sure. It was kind of by accident, and then I guess it got refined.
He refined it, and if you go back, and I can't recall off the top of my head the history, it actually goes back way, way earlier than Roger Callahan. But there's been significant proof, no different than there has been with acupuncture, for thousands of years, that tuning in with that meridian system and dealing with the disruptions or the tracks that are created as a result of life experiences, you can not only neutralize and turn that around, but you open those channels up and you allow the body's natural healing system to take over. And it's all of a sudden easier for you to begin to feel better about yourself. It can be used to overcome limiting beliefs and fears. So especially anybody who's been through any sort of trauma, whether it's domestic violence or sexual abuse or anything during your life, an auto accident, for God's sake, you can totally turn those things around. This technique can help you overcome that disruption in your system and begin to create what you're looking for in your life.
It's really quite an amazing process. And you can find out more information about Sophia Cayer and her book from her website, sophiacayer.com. It's SOPHIACAYER.com. I'm going to link to her from my blog site, crimeprevention101.com. Be sure and sign up for her wonderful inspirational newsletter when you go over to that website. And if you'd like to take a look at the World Center for EFT, which is the master website, it's EMOfree.com. Okay, Sophia, so before the break, we were talking about tapping, and what is the difference between tapping and regular talk therapy?
Well, the Reader's Digest version, or the the simplest way, I guess, to explain it is that talk therapy is phenomenally beneficial for a lot of people, and it really helps them getting back on track, kind of clearing their minds, starting to make decisions, and beginning to just feel better about things. The difference with EFT is that it kind of takes it to a different level, because you start addressing the emotions, those feelings that we experience, not just emotionally, but that we carry around in our body, the tensions and the stresses that we feel, that sense of like hypervigilance that we might carry as a result of a trauma. Mm-hmm. And it works very rapidly.
Well, I think you also hit on it right before our break when you mentioned that traditional therapy can take a long time.
Yeah.
And this tapping method can be much shorter. It
definitely can. And what I frequently say, and I know you've heard me say it, is that each situation is absolutely as unique as we are individuals. And so I have seen people drop something that they've carried for 30 years in the matter of an hour or two, but for somebody else it might take several sessions. With typical talk therapy or counseling, it can be a much longer process, because what tends to happen is that you are trying to logic your way through it and begin to accept it. You're not necessarily neutralizing all those negative emotions. And even if you accept it, you could still be carrying the anxiety or the fear.
Sure, exactly. And I think a lot of times we run away from those things, whereas by tapping those points for some reason, and I'm going to ask you to describe what it is exactly, the process, but tapping somehow, it just hits all those things. But talk a little bit about exactly what it is and how would a session go.
Well, exactly how it is and how a session would go. Let's just talk about, for a second, since we're talking about traumas, one of the things that I've run into is that many people are reluctant because if they've been through trying to seek assistance after something like this, they follow the mainstream routes. And so you go in and you sit and you talk, and it's excruciatingly painful. And so the other great thing about working with tapping or EFT is that you don't have to even tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. in order to relieve the sting or the intensity of that trauma. There are several techniques that we can use, and that's something I always talk to somebody about before they begin the process, and that is their fears or anxieties about even doing it, because even that can be addressed. And if the trauma is so big or intense that they just are convinced they're going to melt down before they even go there, that tapping technique can be used to take that edge off, to alleviate the fear of the fear, if you will. And
actually, you can use tapping and traditional therapy together. They can work together and enhance each other.
Make a great combination. One, they tend to enhance each other, and I highly recommend it, especially for people who feel that therapy is the only route they can go.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of psychologists that I talk to and work with, and counselors, and thank goodness more and more, and I would encourage more and more to incorporate it, because it does combine the pieces very well. They blend and enhance. So if you're let's go back to EFT for a second, somebody that has gone through that trauma and they feel there's just no way they can talk about it or go near it because it's going to be too painful. Just that gentle tapping as they're focused on even the idea of telling the story. They'll begin within a matter of a minute or two to experience some relief. That calming effect starts happening, which you have experienced, I know, yourself.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, which is the awesome thing about it. So for people,
and I was skeptical, I have to tell you, even though I've had experiences with all sorts of alternative healing techniques. I was definitely skeptical, and I was really quite surprised.
Well,
okay, let's put it that way. I was really amazed.
Well, I love the skeptics.
Now, I'm not going to say that I completely accomplished my objective of what I wanted, but the relaxation part of it, and there were some other tangential issues that kind of came up when we were doing our work, and it wasn't for PTSD.
Well, I think that the big thing is that it's understanding the difference between something that can be simple and something that can be complex, and it's not a silver bullet. And sometimes different issues have multiple aspects that need to get addressed, and some issues and aspects can have other aspects and issues attached. So there's a need for persistence in some situations. So what I would say to you is that if you haven't completely obtained or reached those objectives, that there's just that need to do a little more detective work to figure out what still needs some attention.
Yeah, well, that makes good sense, actually. In fact, so you're not going to talk a little more about that, but describe now what tapping is, because you really are tapping.
You really are. You're taking, for the most part, as you go through what we relate to as the sequence, for the most part, you're going to be using a couple of fingers so that you're making sure that you're hitting the end of a meridian point. It just broadens your chances of making sure you're hitting it. And you're going to be focused on whatever the issue is or the fear is. And right now, as we're speaking, I'm literally tapping on what we refer to as the eyebrow point, which is at the edge of the eyebrow next to the nose. And as you go through these points, there's one to the outside of the eye. You are just, you can do it without saying a word, or most of the time, because I feel that it gives more power to the process, you're going to be speaking something, like you might be saying this fear, or if you can't even say the word fear, you can say this feeling. And as you tap through it, it begins to move that energy.
And there are actually 8 points, if I recall, 8.
If you go through the basic shortcut method, okay, there's roughly 8 points, starting with the top of your head, and you just follow down through the body next to the nose, at the eyebrow point, to the outside of the eye, underneath the nose, on the chin, at the collarbone point, and then underneath the arm, which I have people use like the flat of your hand and just think about like hugging yourself. And as ridiculous as it sounds, it is incredibly powerful.
And, I have to tell you, this young woman last night was telling me that she does it while she's walking down the street, which I think is going to look a little odd. And she says it's particularly helpful for finding parking spots, which I still don't know what to do with that one. But, hey,
Well, you can use it for just about anything. I can think of much more beneficial ways to use it, but I know it's whatever works for you, I guess.
She was quite adamant about that, but it looks a little strange if you're walking down the street doing it, but it's very simple. It's very non-invasive. It's easy to learn it, and so there's not really too many things about not trying it.
Right, and as you go through those sequences, what we do, we measure your progress so that you can, which is all subjective. It's actually called subjective units of distress, and you're going to go from 0 to 10, 10 being the I can't stand it point. And as you tap through, you will find that level of intensity, that tension in your body. You're going to pay attention to what you're feeling, whether it's pressure in your chest or shortness of breath or a knot in your stomach or just overall tension in your body. You'll begin to feel it melt away or diminish, and you'll find that when you try to go back to the fear or the anxiety or the memory, that it's softened, that it doesn't have that power or that kick that it did before.
Absolutely, Sophia, and I thank you so much for coming on the show again with me today. I'm going to put a link at sophiacayer.com. Please check it out. Even if you've got just physical problems, don't need emotional acupuncture. sophiacayer.com. Thank you so much, Sophia, and I look forward to speaking with you again shortly.
If you're feeling insecure or apprehensive about your safety in the world today, and you should be, if you're looking for the best pepper spray, the best tasers, or alarms, or innovative personal safety devices, if you're looking for ebooks to help you heal from trauma, to deal with bullies, to learn self-defense, or whatever concerns you, the Safety Store is where nationally recognized crime prevention specialist Susan Bartelstone has curated the products she recommends and uses herself. Tons of free safety advice is available if you need immediate help. And while you're there, be sure to get your free copy of Susan's guide, Keeping Yourself Safe, All-Time Top Tips. That's the Crime Prevention 101 Safety Store at crimeprevention101.com.
Okay, we're back. Don't forget, you can follow the show on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. You can click on the subscribe button in the lower right corner of our YouTube webpage. It really does help us. Also, don't forget to smash that bell so you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to check out the crimeprevention101.com website for safety tips and resources. And while you're there, get Susan's free safety guide, Keeping Yourself Safe, All-Time Top Tips. It's a terrific guide, and I bet there's a lot of tips there that you've never seen before. And you can also DM Susan with questions you may have about your own personal safeties on any of the social media sites, or go old school and email her at solutions@crimeprevention101.com.
That's right, Lydia. So now, what did you think about this interview with EFT?
I thought it was great. I'll be honest with you. I'm more interested in the topic, and I'm definitely going to do my own personal research.
Yeah, and EFT is used for far more than just healing from trauma or stress reduction. If you take a look at Amazon books on EFT, you'll see that it can be used for law of attraction stuff, like attracting wealth, for weight loss, which I've got to try that book. I mean, if anything that will help at this point. I saw there was a book featuring statements for self-defeating behaviors, victimhood, and self-pity. There is tapping for sex, for improving your sex life. I don't think I want to deal with that. I also saw one titled EFT for Christians, 52 Tapping Devotions. And there was one called Tapping for Teens. So I guess if you're having some problem with your teenagers. So, and these things, I guess, if you just get the book, maybe you don't need to work with a therapist, or maybe it would be helpful to do that. I don't know. Maybe it's something that you can do on your own. I think I'm definitely going to, I'm taking a look at that weight loss thing. I got to, figure out something to do.
Yeah, I have to say there's a lot of different categories that you can definitely apply it to in different areas of your life. So it's definitely worth researching in and see how it fits in your life.
Absolutely. Give it a look-see. All right. So now, as we've said before on the podcast, healing is a process, and it's often a long and a difficult process. And for some folks, it's pretty much impossible to do without some kind of therapeutic intervention of any kind. Mm-hmm. Now, for any survivors of whatever who are listening, whether you think you might want to try EFT therapy or EMDR therapy, which we discussed in episodes 6 and 7 of the podcast, or more traditional forms of therapy, it is very important to find some kind of therapy to help you. And more than one therapeutic modality is even better than limiting yourself to just one. So anyway, Lydia, let's review once again the tips we've given out before on how to choose a therapist, because this is so critical.
Yeah, definitely. So when you're looking for a therapist, interview at least 2, maybe even 3, and choose the one you feel fits you best before you make a commitment to therapy. During your assessment interview of the therapist, confirm what area the therapist specializes in. And if there are any areas that the therapists themselves are uncomfortable with, for example, religion, LGBT issues, just make sure you ask those questions. You want to ensure that your therapy goes well. If you opt for a traditional therapy modality that the therapist specializes or is experienced in dealing with crime survivors of rape, sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, whatever, not all are. And they can really set you back. So make sure the person that you get has dealt with these types of issues. If you feel the therapy just isn't working for you, or you aren't getting anywhere after a reasonable trial period, or if you feel you aren't getting along with the therapist the way you thought, don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to stop and find another therapist. The most important thing is that you just don't stop therapy.
Absolutely. And we're going to put this tip sheet on the crimeprevention101.com website in the rape and sexual assault tab, right, Lydia?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, we got some resources for you about where people can find an EFT practitioner and where therapists can inquire about getting EFT training for themselves, maybe as an adjunct to their more traditional practices. So I'm going to put the links in the show notes for that as well. And this is on our YouTube page.
Definitely. And if you want the contact information for Sophia Cayer herself, her email is sophiacayer@gmail.com. You can also go to her website at www.sophiacayer.com. Amazon also has a ton of books on EFT and tapping that you may want to take a look at. If you're interested in finding an EFT therapist or get EFT training to enhance your practice, there's the EFT Universe, which is EFTuniverse.com for professional training. There's Aura Institute, aurainstitute.org, and ICE-EFT. And that is a long URL. So we're definitely going to put it on our show notes. But remember, it's ICE-EFT, and it's basically therapist training and certification. In addition, guys, go to our website. Get Susan's tip sheet. You'll find them in the rape, sexual assault tabs at the Crime Prevention 101 safety tips page. They're great tips. There's tips on surviving rape, myths and facts. There's tips on surviving rape, the road to recovery, and the accompanying The Road to Recovery Life After Trauma Healing Journal, which is coming soon to the Crime Prevention 101 safety store. So, we really encourage you to take a look at Susan's tip sheets. They're great. You're going to get a lot of information. And finally, we're going to put in another tip sheet on how to choose a therapist. So if this subject is of interest to you, don't forget to check out our podcast number 6 and number 7 about another non-traditional modality for healing called EMDR.
And that stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is why they call it EMDR.
Thank you, Susan.
All right. Now, over the course of the coming year, we're going to do more shows about healing. And I'm so into this, Lydia. Yeah, there's so many other things out there besides just the traditional kinds of therapy that are really helping people. And I want you all to know about them. So we're going to be talking about alternative modalities. We're going to be talking about healing through self-defense and or martial arts, healing through creativity, healing through the arts, healing by helping others, and lots of other kinds of modalities.
Yay.
Please continue to send me your comments about the show so I can continue to present topics and resources that will be meaningful to your safety and your quality of life. So until we meet again, as we say here in the Universal Dojo, it'd be a crime not to listen.
So stay tuned and stay safe.